Alhamdulillah, Allahumma shalli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Pertamanya saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada Dr. Vishnu yang sudi untuk melapangkan masa untuk berkongsi ilmu beliau kepada kita semua pada petang ni. Dan juga keduanya saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada tuan-tuan, puan-puan, sahabat semua yang datang pada hari ini. Saya tengok ada yang dekat, ada yang jauh, ada yang datang daripada Negeri Sembilan, daripada Pinang dan sebagainya yang hadir. Jadi saya ucapkan terima kasih. Petang lagi hari Ahad ni, hari orang Kuala Lumpur ni dia relax lah, bukan? Kami ni kalau orang Ipoh ni Sabtu Ahad ni bekerja juga kan. Jadi orang Ipoh ni, orang KL ni sudi untuk lapangkan masa. Jadi saya ucapkan terima kasih. Jadi pada bulan lepas kita daripada pihak Lestari Hikmah sudah memulakan daripada Siri Bengkel Ilmu Mandiri, yang mana pada bulan lepas menampilkan saudara Dr. Ken dan juga saudara Imran pada bulan lepas, dan juga peluncuran bagi karya almarhum Prof. Hussein Alatas, iaitu kita reprint balik daripada buku beliau tahun 1958. Dan untuk pada hari ini merupakan siri yang kedua daripada Bengkel Ilmu Mandiri yang menampilkan doktor dan juga koleksi beliau. Ini saya pun pertama kali lah untuk terlibat dengan satu event untuk perkara-perkara seperti yang kita lihat di depan ini. Dan juga pada hari ini juga pihak Lestari Hikmah menerbitkan daripada karya yang terakhir daripada almarhum Prof. Hussein Alatas. Dan tak silap saya, kata Prof. Farid kepada saya, tulisan ini merupakan satu tulisan yang beliau present satu kertas kerja dan beliau perbaiki semula daripada tulisan itu, tak silap saya sekitar 2-3 bulan sebelum almarhum meninggal dunia. Jadi yang Englishnya sudah diterbitkan oleh Raffles, dan kami ada sedikit membuat pembetulan, ada penambahan sedikit di sudut nota-notanya, dan ada beberapa kesilapan typo yang kami betulkan dalam edisi bahasa Melayu. Dan juga di sudut bibliografi itu juga ada 2-3 buku karya almarhum yang kami tambah berbanding dengan yang asal itu. Jadi pada bulan depan, bulan 10, 11, 12 dan bulan 1 akan menampilkan daripada bengkel yang ketiga, 4, yang kelima, menampilkan Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, Dr. Azhar Ibrahim, Prof. Farid Alatas, Dr. Munirah dan sebagainya. Dan ada beberapa karya lagi yang akan diterbitkan, antaranya iaitu karya imperialism intellectual yang ditulis oleh almarhum Hussein Alatas. Termasuk juga pada bulan depan kita akan menerbitkan satu lagi karya daripada bahasa Parsi yang telah diterjemahkan dalam bahasa Melayu, Kud Ovobo Wal Istihmak, kesedaran diri dan juga keterdayaan, yang ditulis oleh Dr. Ali Syariati, yang daripada bahasa Parsi dan diterjemahkan dalam bahasa Melayu. Jadi sahabat-sahabat semua boleh ikuti daripada TikTok, daripada Instagram, Facebook dan sebagainya Lestari Hikmah untuk mengikuti daripada siri-siri bengkel yang akan diterbitkan nanti. Jadi tanpa membuang masa, saya pun teruja tengok ramai kehadiran yang datang pada hari ini. Jadi dengan segala hormatnya saya jumpa Dr. Vishnu untuk bercerita, berkongsi tentang karya-karya dan juga peta-peta yang ada pada hari ini. Dengan segala hormat dan bersyukur.
Kerana sudi datang pada hari Ahad, saya pun tak tahu kenapa kami semua datang. Kalau aku boleh tidur ke rumah. Tapi dalam ini saya ingin mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada Lestari Hikmah dan juga Pak Chong dan karya-karya kerana undang saya ke sini pada hari ini. Owing to the fact that we have a mixed audience, I will switch from Malay to English and back and forth, but I will not be student. Jadi kita mula dengan satu tesis yang simple. Apakah itu betul? Soalan. Apakah itu betul? Kalau kita hari ini kita bersaing dengan karaoke dan sebagainya, tapi kalau kita menganggap betul mana-mana sekadar satu gambar yang menggambarkan lanskap atau geografi sesuatu tempat, itu bukan satu anggapan yang salah. Tetapi saya rasa kita juga dapat membaca. Membaca. Dan kalau kita sure peta. If you can read maps, makanya ini bermakna bahawa peta itu bukan sekadar satu gambar, tapi merupakan satu naratif. This is the point that I will try to make today. Maps, all maps are narratives that can be read. And if you can read a map, then you can interpret the map. And this is what I will do today. To come to my conclusion, which is that maps, particularly maps of the 19th century up to the present, are political documents of power. Itu tafsiran yang saya ingin buat, bahawa tiap-tiap peta, khususnya peta-peta yang dibuat daripada abad ke-19 hingga kali ini, merupakan naratif-naratif politik yang menggambarkan bukan hanya lanskap yang diberikan, tetapi relasi kuasa dan hubungan antara kuasa dan proses pemerintahan itu. Itulah topik kita hari ini. Jadi kita mula dengan satu sorotan sejarah. We'll start with a general overview of maps. Maps, peta ini bukan seperti yang baru. Maps have been around for a long time. And today I will be focusing on maps of Southeast Asia that were produced in the 19th century at the height of Western colonial power. I'll be looking at few maps that were produced by British map makers in particular. But let's start with a general overview of the evolution of maps. Jadi kita mula dengan gambar ini. Ini peta Asia Tenggara. Dalam bukunya Sebastian Munster yang dibuat pada tahun 1540. Aneh kerana 1540 proses Eropa sampai ke Asia Tenggara. Melaka, Poland, the Portuguese, the Spanish already in the Philippines. And yet when we look at these maps are not obviously geographically accurate. Why? Can we go to the next map? This is Munster. Shelley, next map. Another one by Shelley, next map. Another one by Shelley, next map. It is only by the end of the 16th century, this is Munster as well, Sebastian Munster, in 1598, that we begin to see Asia depicted in geographically correct and recognizable terms. So what is happening? Kalau kita melihat peta yang dibuat pada abad ke-16 dalam tulisan dan dalam buku Sebastian Munster, Shelley, mereka mengangkat kepahaman geografi, kepahaman geografi dunia yang ditulis oleh pemikir-pemikir zaman lama, khususnya Daly. So the earlier maps that you saw are what we call Daly maps. And what we see throughout the 16th century is the evolution of Western knowledge of geography as Europe begins to encounter the non-Western, non-European world. Can we go to the next map? Now here, by the time you get to the 17th century, maps become more accurate. So the works of people like Raffles, Oldine, we begin to see some of the earliest images of Southeast Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, that are more accurate than before. This is Malacca, next one. Kolonial, Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, Buku, Burma, and Siam, Sumatra as well. Next one. Java. Go back to the earlier one. No, Java. Fat Java, next one. You have a thin Java as well. But what is interesting about these maps, let's stick with this map for now. These maps, for nautical purposes, for navigational purposes, are completely useless. Betul-betul ini dibuat untuk sejenis buku, satu genre tulisan yang dipanggil geografi. Geografi waktu itu abad ke-17 bukan hanya geografi yang mana yang kita paham hari ini, tapi buku-buku yang dikatakan geografi sebenarnya merupakan naratif tentang tempat-tempat yang jauh daripada kota. Di dalam buku itu ada cerita tentang masyarakat asal, Afrika banyak fokusnya bukan pada gambar. Gambarnya hanya ditujukan sebagai kain. Ya. Tapi kita lihat dalam bentuk ini, kita sudah dapat lihat bahawa kepentingan ekonomi dan politik Eropah itu jelas. Kenapa? Apabila kita lihat lanskap Jawa, kota-kota yang ada itu semuanya di pantai utara. Kerana di sini inilah pelabuhan kota-kota yang dikunjungi oleh pedagang-pedagang, khususnya pedagang-pedagang dari Eropah. Jadi kita lihat pada awal ya, abad ke-17, fokusnya pada kepentingan ekonomi dan politik. Dari awal lagi, hubungan kait antara politik, ekonomi, dan geografi itu jelas. Next slide. This is by the French map. Next one. Bila kita sampai ke abad ke-18, kita temui betul-betul gini. Nah, betul-betul gini this is by Mandiri, dan ini Selat Melaka. Melaka di situ. Betul-betul gini semakin penting untuk mereka yang dagang daripada Eropah ke Asia, kerana dia mengandungi maklumat tentang laut, selat-selat, sungai-sungai yang ada di sana. Kerana ini zaman sebelum wujudnya kapal terbang. Jadi gerakan ekonomi dunia itu global di laut. And these nautical maps are the first maps that actually show the relationship between modern technology and the science of map making. Next one. And we begin to see these detailed maps. This is Daly's map of Kolonial. The reason why I regard this map as important is that here in the 18th century, you can see how Western knowledge of the non-Western world was very much dependent on an interaction, common interaction between Europeans and non-Europeans. Daly's map is interesting. You can't see it very clearly, but in the cartouche on the side, Daly actually acknowledges local sources of knowledge. He gives thanks to Alexander, Bajau, and Sulu who helped him make this map. Nah, ini saya rasa satu penting apabila Eropah mula mengenali rantau Asia dan Afrika. Mereka bergantung kepada sumber-sumber maklumat lokal. Jadi relasi kuasa, perbezaan kuasa antara orang Eropah dan orang Asia dan Afrika itu hampir sama. Ini akan berubah. This will change. This will begin to change from the 19th century when increasingly, as a result of the scientific revolution and later the industrial revolution, a growing gap of power emerges between the West and the East. And when Western map makers rely on Western data gatherers to produce their maps of the non-Western world. So that this equal relationship that we see in Raffles' map will change in time. Next one. Map of Sulu. Next one. Here's an interesting map, an Italian map, and the reason why I like this map by Sata and Pigley is that it shows the progression of knowledge by the time we get to the 18th century. Notice, India is well documented, but China is still blank. And maps like these actually show us the progression of power. Maklumat dan data itu digunakan untuk memperkembangkan pengetahuan tentang Asia dan Afrika di Eropa. Dan dalam bentuk ini kita lihat bagaimana proses perkembangan pengetahuan, expansion of knowledge, development of knowledge, merupakan satu proses yang memakan masa. It's a historical process. It doesn't happen instantly. It takes time. And so by the time we get to the 19th century, we begin to see something interesting. We begin to see the first detailed maps of Southeast Asia in particular. Next one. And this is the map of Sumatra from a reprint of William Marston's work, History of Sumatra, that first came out in the 18th century, 1786, but then republished in 1811. You have the map here. Can we turn on the light? Because now I can. Rashidi, hidupkan. buat untuk buku beliau History of Java terbit tahun 1786. Pada awalnya ini edisi Prancis tahun 1788 dan ini peta yang sama edisi kedua tahun 1811. Dalam masa 2 dekad, and within 2 decades, we can see the progression of knowledge, the expansion of knowledge. And why is this year important? This year, this book is republished in 2011 because there is a renewed interest in Southeast Asia as a result of one important event, the British invasion of Java. Kalau di Indonesia pun ramai orang di Indonesia lupa bahawa Pulau Jawa itu pernah ditakluk oleh Inggris pada tahun 1811 hingga 1819. Dalam masa 6 tahun ini, apabila British berada di sana, mereka telah mengumpul begitu banyak maklumat hingga akhirnya Raffles yang dijadikan Lieutenant Governor Pulau Jawa oleh company iaitu Inggris, British East India Company, menulis bukunya 2 volume work, The History of Java, 1817, and it is accompanied by this map, Raffles map of Java. Of all the maps of Southeast Asia that I am familiar with, this map for me is perhaps the most interesting and the most important because this is a map that demonstrates the connection between knowledge and power. So, these maps that you see, Raffles map of Java, 1817, Marsden's map of Sumatra, 1811, Crawford's map of Burma, 1829, were all made by the same map maker, John Walker from England. John Walker was famous for his maps, counties of England, that are incredibly detailed with enormous amount of geographical information. But that is understandable. Memang tak heran kalau John Walker membuat betul-betul yang sangat detail dalam Inggris, anda itu ini. Jadi bagaimana John Walker membuat peta Jawa ini pada tahun 1817? Ingat ya, ini 1817, tak ada Google Maps, tak ada satellite, tak ada kamera. Hingga ke hari ini, kalau saya nak jalan daripada Jakarta ke Pacitan atau ke Surabaya, saya boleh guna peta. That's how I carry this. Dan saya telah cuba untuk mengira berapa banyak lagu dan kampung yang ada di peta ini sampai sekarang saya dapatkan terlalu banyak maklumat dimuatkan dalam peta ini. Period ini antara tahun 1811 hingga 1816, 11 is a forgotten episode of Southeast Asian history, but it is a remarkable episode because it is here, during the short British occupation of Java, that we see the British, under the auspices of the British East India Company, attempting to create what would become the template of the modern colonies of Southeast Asia. And the basis of this is knowledge, data gathering. So if you ask, how did Raffles manage to make this map? It's very simple. The invasion force of 12,000 troops included battalions of engineers who did surveys for Raffles, producing this extraordinary map. Now, how do you read these maps? Bagaimana kita dapat membaca dan tafsir seperti ini? Jadi hari ini saya ingin cakap tentang mungkin 3 pendekatan yang kita dapatkan. Three ways of reading maps. The first, maps can be read as statements of achievement and ambition. Secondly, maps can also be read from a gender perspective. It tells you a lot about the mindset of the male colonial explorers and data collectors. And then, maps as a statement of personal vanity and egoism. They don't teach you this in your vocabulary. So, let's start with the first. Before I continue, can I just ask this? How many of you here have actually read Raffles' History of Java? Nanti dua. Oh, dah baca kan? Dah 20 surat tu baca. Siapa yang dah membaca Sejarah Java 2 volume? Isteri saya dah menambut tapi saya tahu dia tak baca. The history of Java is an interesting text. It's a very interesting text because many things are happening in that text. I write about it in my book, The Specific Southeast Asia. Because in my work, what I do is I study empire through language, through narrative. Jadi dalam tulisan Raffles, Sejarah Java, History of Java, kalau kita membaca surface reading, ya memang ia merupakan sesuatu tentang sejarah Pulau Jawa dan masyarakat Jawa. Tapi selain daripada itu, ada dua tema penting. The two themes that run throughout Raffles' book. One, it is in this book that Raffles begins to cultivate the myth of the lazy king, mitos pribumi malas. Dan bukan hanya pribumi yang malas, tapi pribumi yang ketinggalan zaman. Because in Raffles' History of Java, you don't want to be complimented by Raffles, right? These are backhand compliments. Raffles writes about the greatness of Javanese civilization in the past. Yes, they were great, but not any longer. And we know why. Karena Raffles sama dengan ramai dari generasi di Crawfurd di prejudice bahawa kedatangan Islam itu telah menundukkan masyarakat. Jadi dalam tulisan Raffles lah wujudnya istilah the degenerate Javanese. Masyarakat Java yang tidak gerak ke depan tapi gerak ke belakang. Tiap hari mereka semakin mundur. Jadi ini merupakan satu tema yang penting dalam tulisan Raffles. The idea of the historically degenerate Javanese, which later on will become part and parcel of a wider discourse, native degeneracy, used by Orientalist scholars when writing about Asia and Africa. The idea that non-Western societies are on that same linear historical track, but not moving forward, but rather moving backwards. And this is an important theme because it pops up in the map. I'll show you how. The second theme in Raffles' History of Java is Raffles is an Englishman who hates the Dutch. Jadi kalau kita membaca sejarah Java, history of Java, satu tema yang dapat kita baca itu adalah bagaimana korupnya pemerintah Belanda sebelum kedatangan Inggris. Jadi Belanda itu panas, korup, tak tahu mentadbir ekonomi. Jadi siapa yang pandai mentadbir ekonomi? Jadi kedua tema ini jangan serentak dalam tulisan Raffles. Kerana itu kalau kita membaca the history of Java, kita nak membaca dengan mendalam dan mengupas layers of meaning yang ada dalam buku kerana ada banyak naratif serentak. Nah, kalau kita telah membaca buku itu dengan teliti, kita dapat mentafsir peta itu. Apakah peta ini penting dan apakah peta ini mengatakan kepada kita? What is this map trying to tell us? Well, look at the map. After this, when we're all done, you can come close. But see what Tasha. This map is extraordinary. The amount of data that has gone into this map tells us one thing. You have to have power to be able to map an island like this. Notice how, a quick cursory glance, Java is presented as a singularity, cut off from the rest of maritime civilization, cut off from Borneo, cut off from the Malay Peninsula, cut off from Sulawesi, cut off from Sumatra. The focus is on Java alone, because that is the narrative that Raffles is trying to build. Idea bahawa masyarakat Java itu adalah satu masyarakat yang unik, tapi unik dengan ciri-ciri yang negatif. Jadi oleh Jawa dipisahkan daripada archipelago. Pertama. Keduanya, maklumat yang ada di betul ini membuktikan bahwa mempunyai kuasa untuk mementingkan Jawa. To the point where what the map is telling you is that we know your Java better than you. We know more about your land than you do. Think about it. Kalau saya dapat mementingkan Tuhan, saya ada kuasa. Saya tahu mana kamu simpan laptop. Saya tahu ke mana kamu simpan beras. Beras kan? Jadi saya tahu mana kamu simpan beras. Mana kamu simpan duit. Saya tahu. Jadi kalau saya dapat mementingkan rumah kamu, itu membuktikan bahwa saya memiliki kuasa. I have power over you. And that's what this map shows. And this power is demonstrated in this insert here. Look closely after this. This is an interesting parallel map of Java, but it is a map, a mineralogical map of Java. So what is the map saying? Not only do we know your land, we know what's under your feet. We know what's under your feet. You don't, we do. We have science and technology, which you don't. So as an expression of power, as a statement of power, this map is saying a lot of things to us. Now, if you were to read this map as a statement of ambition and as a statement of accomplishment, you can pick up tiny details in the map that are actually very interesting. Next slide. And next slide. Next slide. And next slide. Okay. Here, between Batavia and Siri, Raffles, like I said, Raffles is trying to recount the history of Java, and he has located the Javanese in the past. But the map also documents the achievements of the British in the present. So here we see an interesting detail. Included in the map is the new road built by the British in 1815. Straight line, cuts right across Java. So in a sense, remember, Raffles is not friendly to the Dutch. What Raffles is saying in his map is, you Dutch were here for 200 years. Your world's all singing. We come here in 2 years. Look, we can build a road straight line from Jakarta to Cirebon. The fact that he chooses to add this to his map is important because it is a statement of achievement. Dia membuktikan bahawa British telah berjaya untuk bukan hanya membedakan Java tapi mengubah lanskap dan bahawa bersama mereka perkembangan teknologi ini ada jalan yang baru dibangunkan itu dimasukkan. Nah, kalau ini mencerminkan perkembangan, this demonstrates the development that brought. What about the achievements of the Javanese themselves? Can you go to the next one? Next slide. Okay. Here, around the environment of Jakarta, you will have these references to the ruins of Prambanan and the ruins of Borobudur. There's even a tiny road drawn on the map. And I find this interesting because of all the things that Raffles chooses to put in his map, he includes the ancient history of the Javanese and the most recent modern achievements of the British to accentuate that contrast between modernity and backwardness, the present and the past, thereby locating again presence of the British in Java in the immediate present and locating the Javanese in the past. So it's also telling that he refers to them as the ruins of Borobudur, the ruins of Prambanan. Later on, I invite you to come and have a look at the map closely because I can spend hours as a boring guy my whole life. So I spend my evenings going through these maps, looking for these tiny details, and they're really interesting because the more I study this map, the more I realize that the map is actually telling me something. It's trying to tell me a story, and that's what this map is. Now, from this 19th century map, let's look at these two other maps. As I mentioned earlier, the Marsden map. Peta Sumatera dalam tulisan William Marsden yang diterbit semula pada tahun 1811. Karena pada tahun 1811, Britain telah masuk ke Jawa, jadi ada minat untuk mengkaji semula, belajar kembali tentang sejarah Asia Tenggara, pulau-pulau Asia Tenggara. Kalau kita bandingkan peta original dalam tulisan Marsden yang hampir kosong, peta ini terlihat bahawa dalam period 2,5 dekad begitu banyak maklumat telah dikumpulkan oleh British, sehingga peta yang dibuat untuk edisi kedua tulisan Marsden ini jauh lebih padat dengan maklumat dan data kalau dibandingkan peta yang awal. Peta Crawford juga merupakan satu peta yang menarik. Crawford's map of Burma 1829. This is the war map. This is a map that kills. Now, for you to know this, you need to know a bit about Burma's complicated relationship with the British Empire. Burma was not conquered in one go. It was conquered in stages. Successive Anglo-Burmese wars. First Anglo-Burmese War of 1824-26, Second Anglo-Burmese War of 1852-53, and the Third Anglo-Burmese War of 1855. This map was made in 1889. John Crawford, contemporary of Raffles, was sent to the court of Ava by the British East India Company to negotiate the terms of the Treaty of Yanabo. The Treaty of Yanabo ini merupakan satu dokumen yang penting karena apabila rumah ditalakkan pertama global law yang pertama, Britain membuat tuntutan pada Raja Rumah waktu itu, pusat kuasa rumah di awal jalan, dan Crawford dikirim ke Burma untuk memaksa Raja Rumah untuk menandatangani perjanjian yang lama ini yang berat sekali. Yang obviously it's a one-sided treaty which benefited the British Empire and the British East India Company. Now, this map makes sense when you read Crawford, because all these early writers of Southeast Asia, Raffles, Mandiri, Clifford, Anderson, they were not scholars. They were company men. They worked for the British East India Company. And the nature of colonial capitalism is that it requires data all the time. And Crawford was a company man who served his company first and foremost. So he's able to secure an agreement on the part of the Burmese to surrender the post of Karakat. Now, some people today regard Crawford as a colonial liberal, in the sense that he's seen as a colonialist who just need to make money. And they point to Crawford where they give the example of Singapore, because Crawford's belief was that it would be better for the East India Company to have small centers of power than to try to dominate the whole of Southeast Asia, so as not to get directly involved in the internal politics of these countries. Compare that to India. That makes him a so-called minimalist colonialist. But frankly, between minimalist colonialist or maximalist colonialist, for me, I mean, you're there to basically intervene in domestic politics. Tapi apabila kita membaca tulisan Crawford, satu yang menarik, ada juga tema-tema tertentu. Satu tema yang sangat dominan dalam tulisan Crawford, dalam bukunya, An Account of the Embassy War of Ava, adalah idea bahawa orang bermenang. Kalau dibandingkan dengan orang Jawa dalam tulisan Raffles, orang Jawa ni tiap hari kopi, main-main kulit, tadi passive, docile, like Raffles, a childlike race. But in Crawford's writing, Crawford presents the Burmans in particular as an aggressive race, a warlike race. In the 19th century, it was very common in the British press to refer to Burma not as the Kingdom of Burma, but the Burmese Empire, which is, of course, ironic because right here is the British Empire next door in Bengkel. So we begin to see the generational consensus that Burma is a threat. Burmans hate us. And this is a theme that pops up again and again in Crawford's writings. The Burmans will never agree to this treaty. They hate us, they don't like us, they will attack us. And so when we look at this map, and we look at the map while reading the text, Crawford goes at length, right at length, about how the Burman kingdom is constantly posing a threat to its neighbors in Assam and Manipur. These are the pathways for Burma to attack. But remember, if these are the pathways for Burma to attack, these are also the pathways to attack Burma. And that's why when we see this map, like Raffles' map, it can't be read in isolation. It have to be read in context of the text. And when you read Crawford's account of the mission to Harvard, he talks about how the Burmese are preparing for war. The other maps that accompany the text are maps of, there's a map of Rangoon, for example, where he actually details where are the weak spots to break into Rangoon. And so, what this map does is, it provides detailed strategic information about the ways through which Burma could be weakened. And of course, that happens. Decades later, Second Anglo-Burmese War, by the Third Anglo-Burmese War, Mandalay is taken, the whole of Burma gets absorbed into the British Empire. So, these two maps, whether it's Raffles' map of British achievements in Java, or it's Crawford's map of Burmese capabilities in Burma, are political in nature. And we cannot read them, in a kind of ahistorical context. I mean, of course, they're pretty. They're pretty. But they are also pretty awful documents of power. They tell us how geography, power come together in politics of invasion at the time. Jadi kan begitu. Saya rasa kita juga dapat membaca, kita dapat baca dan memberi satu tafsiran. Dan buat saya peta-peta ini bukan hanya merupakan gambar-gambar yang menggambarkan lanskap geografi tempat tertentu, tapi menceritakan kepada kita ambisi kepentingan politik dan ekonomi yang ada di kalangan golongan ini, British dan juga Belanda dan sebagainya seperti itu. Dan ini merupakan, saya rasa, ini satu cara kita dapat membaca kembali peta-peta ini. Selalunya apabila kita membaca buku sejarah, kita hanya melihat, tapi bagi saya peta ini merupakan satu dokumen yang patut dibaca dan tidak dilihat. You don't just look at maps, you need to read maps. So that's one way of reading. I think I'm going on a bit too long, so I'm going to hurry up a bit. Another way of reading, you can read maps as gender documents. Ambil satu pendekatan gender bila kita membaca dan tafsirkan. Kerana hingga abad ke-17, abad ke-19 dan awal abad ke-20, proses pemetaan ini merupakan satu proses yang dikerajui oleh kaum lelaki. Men, I mean, all the way up to late colonial capitalism, colonialism has been often a masculine enterprise. Kerana persepsi pada waktu itu belajar jauh daripada Eropah merupakan satu tempat yang berbahaya, Asia Tenggara merupakan tempat yang berbahaya, manakala yang jatuh kepada. Jadi Asia Tenggara itu satu tempat yang bahaya, dan oleh kerana itu ini merupakan satu bidang untuk kaum lelaki khusus. Jadi apabila lelaki menulis, membuat dan cari data dan maklumat, aspek gender itu juga saya rasa masuk dalam proses pemetaan, because mapping can also be seen as a very gendered process. It's a male-dominated process that brings with it a certain masculine sensibility. What are these maps? These maps are a scripture, not the one in Tamadun, no? These maps are a scripture. Because what's happened? Apa yang berlaku? Apa yang berlaku adalah alam semula jadi. Wujud yang ada di luar Eropah itu telah dibuka, denuded for the Western gaze. And this is what happens with maps and map making. You nude a place. You render it not only objectifiable, but you make it visual. I can now see you. When you read Edward Said, I'm not sure whether it's in his book Orientalism or Culture and Imperialism, but Said has this very interesting phrase. He talks about the fantasy of the infinite penetrability of the Orient. It's a mere fantasy. To break through, to be new, to render naked the other. And in this sense, these maps, are a precursor to the kind of erotic Orientalist photography that would emerge by the end of the 19th century. Where first you denude the land, and then you denude the people. You see this in the postcards that were made of North Africa. Gambar-gambar di mana wanita di Afrika Utara itu selalu fotografi dalam keadaan yang di mana mereka separuh bogel. Nah, ini untuk karena di sini lah ya, wujudnya satu industri yang baru, yaitu Kolonial Orientalist Pornography. Dan betul-betul itu mencerminkan aspek-aspek yang sama, di mana bumi dianggap satu tempat yang rahasia, tapi rahasia itu akan dibongkar. Kenapa? Untuk hendak peringan kolonial kapitalisme di barat. So that's perhaps the beginning of these maps. And I would really like to see, more work in this area, because in terms of critical feminist discourse, there's been relatively little written about the relationship between mapping and power and gender. The third and final point I want to raise is these maps are also statements of personal vanity and egoism. These maps, imagine yourself as a functionary of the British East India Company. Seorang aparat di timur waktu itu. Ada KPI-nya. Berapa banyak musuh saya dah tewaskan, berapa banyak tanah yang saya dah curi, rampas. Itu KPI. Betul-betul itu merupakan sebahagian dari KPI-nya untuk membuktikan. Tengok apa yang saya buat. I managed to map the whole of Java. Nah, oleh kerana itu, ada juga detail-detail yang menarik dalam bercerita. Go to the next image. Tak sebelum. Okay. Here, back to the Raffles map. Of all the colonial criminals that I hate Raffles. But this guy is so vague. His name appears twice on this map. First, it appears here, map of Java, made during the time of the administration of Lieutenant Governor Raffles. But if you look closely in central Java, there's another line, not a straight line, a meandering line, which traces the path taken by Lieutenant Governor Raffles as he explored Java. So literally Raffles saying, see, I walk all over this. I walk all over this. It's like when you do your exercise app on your phone, right? You walk over, keeping time, and you can see. And here, Raffles. But remember, this map of Java is not made for the Javanese. Crawford's map of Burma is not made for the showing his fellow Englishmen, his fellow British readers, see what I did. See what I did. And this I, me, this very millennial discourse, this I, me stuff, is found not only there, but in the later maps that we have made of the millennials. The last two maps I look at are this one, Dominic Daly's map of the Valley, Iraq, and Hugh Clifford's map of Pahang, Terengganu, and Kelantan, perhaps the first map. In all these maps, Raffles, Daly, Clifford, we see these lines where Clifford, who once proudly wrote, he was very young at the time, his 20s, I have single-handedly added 40,000 square miles to the British Empire. I have single-handedly added 40,000 square miles to the British Empire. And to prove it, it's on this map. There is a red line where Clifford traces his journey from the interior of Pahang all the way to the Terengganu coast, all the way to Kelantan, by land and sea, by boat, all the way back. You get that in Daly's map as well. So these maps, on the one hand, purport to be scientific documents of objective information, which they are. For a map to be a map, it has to map, so the information has to be correct. But they are more than that. They are more than that. They tell us stories. They tell us stories, and they give us other ways of reading them. Jadi kalau kita baca, kalau kita cukup tafsir betul-betul ini sebagai satu statement tentang kepribadian individu yang kuat betul itu, kita dapat belajar banyak tentang mereka, psikologi mereka, mindset mereka, pendekatan mereka, perspektif mereka, bagaimana mereka menganggap bumi sebagai satu kertas yang kosong, di mana naratif mereka sendiri dapat terus. So the landscape of Asia becomes a blank page for the personal narratives, personal biographies of these men. And that's why when you read the history of Java, or when you read Crawford's account of his mission to Java, or when you read Clifford's account of his journey from Pahang to Kelantan and back, you need to ask yourself, finally, what are these maps about? Apa cerita? Apakah yang diceritakan kepada kita apabila kita melihat dan membaca tafsir itu? Apakah ini benar-benar peta-peta Java, Pahang, Sumatera, Burma? Yes. But more than that, these are maps of India. These are maps of India. Because what do these maps tell us? They tell us about how, at a particular time in European history, Europeans, in this case the British, the British maps, but also Dutch, French, Spanish, but how the British saw themselves in relation to the world that had become objectifiable, modifiable. So these maps for me are as much maps of England as they are maps of Southeast Asia. And why is this important? Now I need to justify my salary. Because Daly is hard enough to be a historian. Nobody listens to us. We repeat TikTok all the time. And the other thing is people will always ask, so what? So what? Why is this important? Kenapa ini penting? Dalam penulisan sejarah saya mengambil satu kata yang agak berbeda. Saya tak menulis sejarah yang bergantung khususnya pada data, tarikh, nama, tapi saya juga menggabungkan beberapa masuk sejarah, tapi juga sastra dan falsafah, khususnya linguistik dan analisis wacana, diskursus analisis. Jadi dalam buku saya, itulah yang saya coba buat, itu menulis tentang sejarah perkembangan kedatangan dan perkembangan kolonial kapitalisme di rantau kita, tapi dari satu perspektif yang agak berbeda. Karena memang ada banyak buku tentang sejarah penjajahan Inggris di sini atau Belanda di Indonesia, banyak. Tapi pendekatan yang sangat beda adalah satu di mana kita dapat mentafsir kembali apa yang berlaku itu melalui satu lensa yang baru. Dan saya rasa kita, for those of us who live in the post-colonial world today, when we write a critical history of empire, that marks the moment when the post-colonial scholar engages with the legacy of colonialism from within and attempts to critique it from within. And I think that's a very important step that we need to take. It's an important step for us to take because, as I said, when I write about Raffles' map of Java, for me, this is as much a map of England as it is a map of Java. So what am I doing? I'm not just writing a history of Southeast Asia, I'm writing a history of Europe. I'm writing a history of the West. Because the West is not isolated from the non-West. And when we manage to do that, then it marks the moment when the West doesn't belong to the West anymore. And I think that is a very important step when it comes to the liberation of the post-colonial mind. We need to engage with this in a manner in which we write history complex in order to problematize very simple dichotomies, east, west, and what have you, so that actually they're actually interconnected. And as we do that, into this power. These are all documents of power. These are all documents of power. They come at a time when colonial power was growing through all the tools and modalities of modernity. Only a modern world can make a map like this. If you look at the earlier maps, something like this is inconceivable because nobody even thought of the need to document like this. So the historicity of these maps, we live in a region where again maps are being contested. Idea online. There's no such thing as an innocent map. There's no such thing as an innocent map. There's no such thing as a neutral map. There's no such thing as a wholly objective map. It doesn't exist. If we understand that, then I also think that the relationship between geography, history, and politics will become closer. And that, of course, is in keeping with the trends in academia today, to talk about interdisciplinary work, intersectionality, and what have you. So today I've offered you, at least 3 other ways of looking at these maps. I hope to persuade you to read the books. You can certainly look at the maps afterwards. Again, thank you very much for wasting 1 hour on a Sunday to come and look at maps produced by dead men. But thank you very much. I think we have time for maybe a short discussion if you want. And yeah.
I'm just curious. Throughout your talk, you say that map becomes map without having to think about power nomination. So, in the sense of modern context where map making happen, but in a digital way, in the sense of modern context where map making happen, but in a digital way, do you see that this kind of essence of map based on power nomination still exists up until now, or you can perceive another way of doing maps? What are the differences between these maps and maps from other civilizations?
Okay. Thank you very much. It's not Thursday, so I'm not wearing batik. But if it was Thursday, I would wear a batik sarong. And this point about maps
and non-Western ways of looking at maps. You can say that these are Western maps. You can also say that they are modern maps. You can also say that they are colonial capitalist maps, because that's what they are. Right? But if you look at non-Western map making, in Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, he talks precisely about this. Benedict Anderson has this wonderful line. He says, the three components of empire: the census, the museum, and the map. These three things. Because that's what empires are built on. When you watch movies nowadays, all these movies and documentaries about empires, all fighting, which is not true. Which is not true. There's violence at the beginning, but all empires want to end the violence because they have to make money. And for them to make money, there has to be peace. And so map making comes there. But in the process, the question you raise, this particular way of looking at geography also marginalizes and silences other alternative ways of understanding our landscape. That's why I brought up Javanese batik. If you look at Javanese batik, for instance, a common pattern that you see is called the semen, I think. You see a mountain, a village, a field. Yeah? That's a map. That's what Anderson calls a cosmological map. Because from the non-Western point of view, the only map that matters is your cosmological map. Where am I in the universe, with the heavens above and the material world below? And this is an idea that we get all the way from Persia to China, this cosmological map. Another map that you have is the oral map, because Southeast Asians, or Asians in general, would often have these oral maps in the sense that, okay, how do I get from Malacca to Jambi? Well, you sail north for one day, then you sail east 3 days later, and these are like instructions. Right? These forms of map making were completely eclipsed with the arrival of this kind of knowledge, because this becomes the definitive thing. Today, even you go to any institution of learning, it's very rare for people to talk about oral maps, But you can read the Hikayat Hang Tuah as a work of geography. That's what I do, right? Because that's what the Hikayat Hang Tuah tells you, how to get to India. See? You sail in this direction, and then you wait for the wind to change and you sail in another direction, and then further you can go to China, you can go to Persia. So what is the Hikayat Hang Tuah? It's also a work of geography. But we don't see it because our understanding of geography, our post-colonial understanding of geography is this. Kalau tak ada peta, tak ada peta lah. Kalau tak ada peta, itu bukan karya geography. Yeah? And I think that's wrong. So the question you raise is an important one. Now, as to today, people talk about the democratization of maps. You'll be fascinated by what's happening in Philippines. In Philippines, there are a lot of local activists and scholars and lay scholars who are mapping and remapping and reinterpreting the mapping of the Philippines. So you don't simply need to have a map like this, a map of terrestrial geography. You can have a social map. You can have a map of social class. Sometimes you see this online, a map of pollution, with the countries that pollute the most, biggest, So you got America, huge, and then you got other countries, small. These are maps too. So I think we can do that in the way that geography is always contestable. But I don't think we have escaped the grip of power yet. Because when you talk about, online, you're not Bill Gates, I'm not Bill Gates. Right? So all these technologies that are made available to us, whether it's ChatGPT or, map-making tools, they're also, means to harvest data. They're also produced by corporations that have corporate interests. So whether we can actually break free from that, I think that is a question that I can't answer. I don't know what the answer is. But at least this much I'll say. Over the last 2 decades, in some parts of Southeast Asia, I really see how geography has now become part of the public debate. And that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Like I said, the example of Philippines, where you have people who are now attempting alternative map-making projects. So perhaps that's what we are looking at. But we've not escaped power. We've not escaped power, right? And right now, all of us, if your phone is on, you're contributing to the geographic power of these corporations because they know where you are. And I say, mana dia? Oh, gerak budaya. So that's it. We are surrendering our geographical data all the time by simply turning on that horrible machine, right? So we are also now witting or unwitting participants in this mapping of the world. When you like something on Facebook, that's mapping as well. They are mapping out your interests, your concerns, your likes, your dislikes. So we never left it. We never left it. And I think this is why we need to start talking about this to at least make people aware of the fact that we don't just inhabit geography, we are geography. We are the human landscape. We are that human landscape. So we need to be aware of this. And this is my humble attempt to get people to think about the relationship between mapping and power. But thank you for your question. Yes. Can I pass? Exactly. The intention of the maps, because they differ from one to the other. Yes. Algorithm could have been making it for his own purpose, for his own self, but at the same time, for others, it was really to map, like looking for information and all that. And so it was very instinctive. Yes. And so sometimes when we look at the map and we say, oh, it's not really well made or up to par, but possibly it's because they were trying to hide, yes, or there were secrets also. Yes. Disinformation. As you say, map is knowledge, and knowledge is power. Yeah. And therefore you have to guard it, especially the Dutch against the English or against the Spanish, yes, or the Portuguese. That's one. And so I found it very interesting, that point that you made. But at the same time, who is it for? And that's very strong. Second point that you made that I found also quite interesting is that, yes, maps are storytellers, but storytellers not only of the European who made it, but as you said, and here you mentioned about Dalrymple, and that Dalrymple specifically wrote in his map that he says that his informant, or yes, some person who really, I think it was somebody from Pampanga. Yes, two Datoks. The northern. Yes. Who became his like aide, right? Yes. And so here, this made me think, and so as storytellers, and as you were mentioning, post-colonial thinking, and therefore we can really talk about the story of the other. Yes. Because the informants were the other. And so the toponyms themselves, the name places, can show us who were the informants, right? Because if a word is, for example, a Sama word, or another an Iban word, or another ethnic word, and therefore the informant would have been that. So I thank you so much for your talk, and I found that quite interesting. Thank you as well. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, today you can just go to Kinokuniya and buy Raffles' History of Java reprint. Or if you're really stingy like me, just download the PDF. But I don't think Raffles, when he wrote the History of Java, thought that 200 years later, some guy from Penang like me would be reading his book because he wasn't writing for me. He wasn't even writing for the Javanese. And so this question of audience is important. Yeah? Who are these maps and texts for? And in the case of Raffles or Anderson, it's very clear. The book is dedicated to the board of directors of the East India Company. These are reports. I mean, it's funny, the trend then was to call everything history. So it's history of Java, a history of the Indian archipelago by Crawford, history. But they're not works of history. I'm not saying that they didn't do historical research. They are fundamentally reports to colonial companies. And this is data. I'm giving you data. So in answer to your question, and now we, the post-colonial scholar, we can trace this. Who are these reports for? We know who they are for. They were meant for the boards of directors of colonial companies. They were meant for generals and naval commanders who are preparing invasions. That's what this data is being collected for. It's purely instrumental. Yeah? And this is the instrumentalization of knowledge. And the reason why I find this important is that we need to reread these texts today. One, to be aware of this, and two, like you said, to recover these other sources that have been marginalized or forgotten. But this is how we start. This is how we start. Once I nearly wrote to, you know the guidebook, Rough Guide? I wanted to write a complaint to Rough Guide. Because, Rough Guide is not a bad guide. When you're a poor student, everybody uses Rough Guide, right? The Rough Guide to Indonesia is not a bad guide, it's a good guide. But at the end, they've got a bibliography, books to read before you visit Indonesia. The first book was Raffles' History of Java. I felt like writing to them, this book's got nothing to do with Java. This is an imperialist text. But now we can have these contestations. We can have these contestations. And to go back to the question earlier about, not only native sources of knowledge, but native geographies. I mean, for instance, Bajau Laut history is oral. That means their geography, their maritime geography is oral as well. And I think it's hugely important, living as we do in a world where social media is homogenizing everything. And we're seeing the death of languages. We're not just seeing the death of languages, we're seeing the death of language systems and of discourses. And I think native geographies and native histories, especially oral geographies and oral histories, need to be preserved and researched and documented, and taken seriously. So to go back to your question, I too agree. These texts, these books, these maps were not made for us. Once I gave a talk on Raffles at the Singapore Museum, and I just, because they got the statue of Raffles outside, right? So I felt like saying, if Raffles were alive, I wouldn't be in this museum. I'd be sweeping the garden outside. That's the reality, right? That's the reality. Yeah, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So I think we need to do several things. We need to debunk some of these narratives, these which have become, like I said, hegemonic. If History of Java ends up in the Rough Guide to Indonesia, it is hegemonic. It's saturated. We need to debunk that and challenge that. But in the process of doing so, we also need to excavate and do our own archaeology. We need to excavate these other narratives, our own narratives that have been forgotten. I'm not saying that anything is good just because it's native. Yeah, I mean, some nasty things were also done in the name of nativism. But I think that does contribute to having a more comprehensive, a more complex history. And so for me, that's why even these maps, they're part of a complex history. Because, as you know, even with the battalion of British engineers with him, Raffles could not have collected this much data of Java without native assistance. And we know this for a fact because the only native power that was attacked was Yogyakarta. Yogyakarta was the only kingdom that resisted. All the rest collaborated. And so that means that there are all these other histories, all this historical data which no one has excavated. How was this information found? Naming, for instance, yeah? When you call this hill that, or this mountain that, where are these names from? Where did they get these names from? So these are the sort of things that is super exciting to historians like me, but we're generally boring anyway. So I find that exciting, but I think it is a worthwhile effort. Wow, alamak. 1, 2, 3. Hey, don't call me Prof, please.
Just want to continue because when you mentioned about how to solve collaborative and networking process, I want to know how the psychology and process works. Maybe can you discuss more about it?
Okay.
I wanted to ask, is there any insights we can get from what was omitted from these maps, other than just what was in them? So, for example, if Raffles' map highlights the accomplishments of ancient Java and of the British Empire, did he exclude accomplishments of Islamic civilization or the London Empire?
Soalan ringkas, pernahkah orang tempatan memeta lokasi ataupun geografi mereka sendiri sebelum peta-peta yang dibuat oleh West? Kalau tiada, apa yang menyebabkan mereka tidak memerhatikan tentang kepentingan pemetaan?
Okay, good. I'll try to answer the questions one by one in order. The map-making process that was applied to the non-Western world is exactly the same as the production of maps. So that involves printing, that involves basically geographical surveys. Like I said, this map, this map, this map, these three maps are all made by the same map maker, John Walker. And if you've seen John Walker's maps of England, I mean, they're extraordinary. I mean, they're really extraordinary maps. Like the Java map, you can use John Walker's maps of England until today, right? So in terms of the technologies were the same. Often the maps, however, here's the difference. The difference is, this goes back to the earlier question about data gathering, right? It's understandable that John Walker can map England. It's his country, for heaven's sakes, right? But abroad, then this is the process where translation takes place, yep. Because you have the names of places that then have to be translated into either an English idiom or into English words, Latinized words or what have you. This means that there is, I mean, in all these endeavors, like in India, for instance, there's an army of native functionaries. What do the British do the moment they take Bengal? One of the first things the British do when they take over Bengal is they build the college in Calcutta, the East India College in Calcutta. Why? Because immediately they understand the war is over, now we need peace, because peace is good business. Remember, it's the East India Company. We need peace. To have peace, you need law. For there to be law, you have to speak the same language. It's very Lockean, right? You need law. So what does the college do? It trains the first generation of British administrators in all the languages of India, from Tamil to Bengali. It also brings all manner of South Asians into the orbit of British order of knowledge and power. So they learn English. And that's where we have the difference between, say, imperial map-making and map-making in Europe. But the end result is the same, which is domestication. Yeah, domestication. Somehow that was supposed to lead to your question again, which was? Omissions from the map. Yeah, exactly. So the omissions of the map, well, here, like I said, one of the most startling things about Raffles' map of Java is that it's only Java. So we have an omission already. Java is somehow mysteriously disconnected from the rest of Southeast Asia. So maps are always selective. Yeah. Maps, paintings, photographs are the same, you know, unless you randomly drop your camera and accidentally photograph your footler. But otherwise, what angle you choose, where you focus, that tells you a lot about you more than the photo, right? I mean, if you take a photo of me now and you focus only on my nose, that tells me a lot about you, right? So the way, what is omitted is for me equally interesting. Yeah? And often, here's Crawford's map of Burma. Crawford, in his History of the Indian Archipelago, has the entire of Southeast Asia. So what I find interesting about this map is, like this map, it presents one part of Southeast Asia as a singularity, right? So that's a kind of omission because it cuts Burma off from its neighbors. It cuts it off from its regional history in the same way that it cuts, Raffles' map cuts Java from the maritime history of Southeast Asia. But other things that are omitted, we see Apakah kepentingan yang mendorong proses pemetaan ini pada waktu itu? Kepentingannya adalah untuk mencari jalan-jalan, jalur-jalur untuk perdagangan kolonial. Ya, so ports are important, sea routes are important. So when you look at the Mobile map earlier, right, the one where you see the Straits of Malacca, there's nothing about the geography of Sumatra or the Malay Peninsula, but it's very accurate when it comes to mapping out the depth of the Straits of Malacca, so that British ships know where to sail, where not to sail. So all these maps exercise this. And I think I can't give you a firm answer because every map is different. In all maps, there has to be selectivity. Like I said, it can't be a neutral map. There can't be an innocent map. But what is foregrounded and what is backgrounded, that's interesting. And that's why when we read maps, we have to read them. We don't look at them. You're trying to read, okay, what's actually being shoved in my face? And what's being pulled into the background. So I think each of these maps actually tell a different kind of story. If you look at Daly's map, right? Daly's map is focusing only on the Kinder Valley, but if you read the inserts, basically it says, here got tin. Yeah. So you know why he's there. You know, this is a map, this is literally data mining and mining. It's a map, because Daly is sent to Perak to map out Perak. But basically, you know why the British are there. Western capital is about to break into the Perak economy to cripple native capital. And they need to have leverage. And so it's not just a map, it's a survey. It's a geological survey that they're carrying out. Then, kepada soalan yang terakhir, ya, di manakah peta-peta tempatan? Saya rasa kalau dalam konteks masyarakat Asia Tenggara sendiri, sebenarnya masyarakat Asia Tenggara, kita tak buta ya kepada realiti bahawa pemetaan dan kuasa itu ada hubung kaitnya. Jadi ini satu cerita daripada peta Daly. Dominic Daly diutuskan ke Perak dan Selangor untuk memetakan Perak dan Selangor, ya, untuk mencari di mananya deposit-deposit timah dan bahan-bahan lain yang berharga. Daly kemudian cuba pergi ke Johor untuk memetakan Johor juga. Tapi apabila dia sampai ke Muar, dalam tulisan Daly dia ada satu episod yang menarik. Apabila dia sampai ke Muar, dia minta izin daripada Datuk Muar pada waktu itu. Tak ada nama, jadi saya tak tahu siapa Datuk ini, tapi Datuk Muar. Dia minta izin untuk memetakan Johor. Jawapan Datuk itu menarik. Dia kata, tak boleh. Kerana kalau apabila jarum dah masuk, benang akan menyusul. Once the needle penetrates, the thread will follow. Jadi Datuk Muar ni faham bahawa peta, khususnya peta-peta kolonial ini, ada tujuan yang matlamat yang lain, yang ada kesan negatifnya kepada masyarakat tempatan pada waktu itu. Jadi saya rasa oleh kerana itu, relasi kita dengan proses pemetaan, ya kita membuat peta. Kalau kita melihat buku-buku teks yang wujud dalam bahasa vernacular, ya, ujung abad ke-19 dan awal abad ke-20-an, kita telah mula temui buku-buku geografi dalam bahasa Melayu dan tulisan Jawi. Dan di situ ada peta. Sama juga dengan peta-peta yang keluar daripada Empire Ottoman di Turki pada waktu itu. Tapi kebanyakan peta-peta ini mengambil maklumat dan data daripada peta-peta Eropah. Nah, buat saya ini merupakan satu point yang sangat penting. Ya. This is a turning point in our history. It is when we begin to accept a particular understanding of geography. Jadi tradisi pemetaan kita sendiri itu dilupakan kerana dianggap tidak saintifik. Tapi malangnya kan, inilah kesan proses penjajahan mental. Ya, dalam tulisan Ibn Khaldun, ya, masyarakat itu dijajah apabila ia menganggap diri ia sendiri mundur dan ingin meniru cara-cara dan gaya penjajah. Jadi apabila kita mula menyoal kembali, ya, apakah pengetahuan kita tentang geografi kita itu betul-betul saintifik atau tepat, dan kita mula mengadaptasikan, ya, maklumat dan data yang dikumpulkan oleh Barat pada waktu itu, jadi proses westernization itu bermula. Tapi ia tak unik kepada rantau kita. Jepun juga mengikut jalan yang sama. Malah Jepun lanjut ke depan ya, kerana proses modernization di Jepun itu adalah ala Eropah. Tapi ini yang menarik. Kalau anda ke Arsip Nasional Jepun di Tokyo, cuba pergi ke Dewan Peta. They have a map room in the archives of Japan in Tokyo. So when I was there, I said, "Can I look at your maps, Japanese maps of Southeast Asia?" And they were amazing. The Japanese maps of Indochina, French Indochina, were better than the French maps of Indochina. So I asked them, "How come your maps are so good? You know, I mean, it's so accurate. Even the French colonial maps are not as good as your maps." It's very simple. There were so many Japanese photographers in Indochina at the time, yeah, like here in Singapore, in Penang. And these photographers would take photos and also do mapping. All this data would be fed back to Japan, to the army. And that's why in World War II, when Japan invaded Vietnam, you know, they got Vietnam just like that, and then from Vietnam they could hit the Malay Peninsula. So there we see how the Japanese mapping tradition follows the Western tradition, which also then confirms Japan is on the path of empire, because it wants to become a modern imperial power. And what's a modern imperial power? It's a Western imperial power. So it's a case of imitation. Jadi oleh kerana itu saya rasa inilah tragedi kita. Ya. Banyak bidang-bidang yang dahulunya wujud di kalangan masyarakat, bukan hanya masyarakat di Malaysia, tapi di seluruh rantau Asia ini saya rasa telah dilupakan. Dan satu contoh yang saya rasa lebih bagus adalah dalam bidang perubatan, ya, traditional Asian medicine. Tapi sekarang telah menjadi satu yang trendy kerana sangat woke dan sangat instagramable, dan jadi tiba-tiba universiti telah pula mengajar tentang traditional Asian medicine. Jadi kita lihat ya, tradisi perubatan Asia itu hidup kembali. Tapi hanya apabila ia telah diiktirafkan oleh Barat. Sama dengan kita, ya. Kalau kita nak pakai sarung, kita malu. Tapi Mak Saleh pakai sarung masuk KLCC, wow, semua orang nak Instagram, nak ambil foto, Mak Saleh pakai sarung. Jadi kalau Mak Saleh pakai sarung, kita boleh pakai sarung. Ya. Jadi itulah, ini beban kita. Beban yang kita pikul, iaitu beban mentaliti masyarakat yang telah dijajah dan mungkin tak sedar setakat mana kita masih dijajah. Ya. Tapi penjajahan ini bukan penjajahan Barat Timur, tapi ini penjajahan dari segi hegemoni, kuasa dan kapital yang menjadi satu fenomena global pada waktu ini. Ya. Kerana masyarakat di Eropah juga dijajah. Ya. But thank you very much for your question. Ya. Satu lagi yang menarik juga adalah gambar. Gambar. Kerana kita ada tradisi melukis, ya, di Asia Tenggara. We have a long history of illustration. Tapi kalau kita melihat lukisan-lukisan, katalah lukisan di Jawa, ya, tradisi itu masih hidup. Malah, walaupun orang Jawa dijajah oleh Belanda, tetapi tradisi melukis cara ala Jawa itu tak pupus, tak hilang, ya, tak lesap. Dan kerana itulah kadang-kadang anda kalau ke museum ke mana ke dapat melihat manuskrip Jawa di mana ada gambar, ya, perang antara Jawa dan Belanda. Dan yang menariknya, orang Belanda tu selalu dilukis besar. Muka dia megah, hidung dia besar, mulut dia besar. Dan di sini kita lihat satu yang ironik, ya, kerana orang Belanda anggap bahawa apabila orang Belanda itu dilukis dengan saiz yang besar, itu satu pujian. Ya. Walhal dalam konteks sistem nilai dan sistem tafsiran Jawa, orang yang besar itulah orang yang bodoh. Kenapa? Kerana itu kalau kita lihat wayang kulit kan, hero-heronya, Arjuna, Yudhishthira, kecil aja. Kenapa? Kerana orang yang kecil, yang slim gitu, kuasa yang ada pada dia itu telah dikonsentrasikan. Walhal orang yang lemah, yang tak dapat menahan nafsu, rasa marah, gelojo, tamak, ini orang yang tak dapat mengawal nafsunya. Jadi oleh kerana itu, ia kembang. Jadi, Belanda yang besar itu adalah orang yang lemah dari perspektif Jawa. Ya, dari perspektif Jawa. Kerana itu kalau untuk wayang kulit kan, yang gangster-gangster semua ni besar. Yang hero dia kecil. Ya. Ini bukan kerana hero dia pendek, tapi kerana hero tu dapat memusatkan kuasa dia. He controls his power, where he becomes a concentrated individual. Now, there, in the tradition of illustration, I think we have continuities. But map making, like I said, sadly, we've lost our tradition. Yeah, we've forgotten our traditions. We forget that even the batiks we wear are actually maps. These are cosmological maps that tell you of your place in the wider universe of things, right? Because what interested us, our ancestors then, was perhaps not rubber or tin, but rather your place in the cosmology of the universe and where you're going after this. Yeah, because life is just an episode. So, I learned there. I got no more saliva lah, so cukup lah. Ya, okey. Boleh ya? Boleh. Ya. Sementara kita menikmati karaoke daripada jiran-jiran kita ni, hanya satu pengumuman yang saya ingin buat. Bersama dengan Lestari Hikmah, kita akan adakan mungkin satu siri diskusi tentang beberapa buku sejarah yang buat saya amat penting, ya, dan patut dibaca. Kerana this will be a series about ways of history, ways of historicizing. Because I am not an old school historian. I'm about to retire, but doesn't mean I'm old school. And I want to introduce to you different ways of writing history, different ways of understanding history. Jadi kita akan mulakan satu siri, tak tahu bila lah, tapi kita akan mulakan satu siri perbincangan mengupas buku tentang beberapa teks yang saya anggap penting, termasuk Tsvetan Todorov, The Conquest of America, Simon Sharma, Citizens, A Chronicle of the French Revolution, John Ellis, A Social History of the Machine Gun, dan beberapa lagi buku-buku yang sangat hot dan menarik, di mana kita dapat berfikir tentang apakah itu sejarah? What is history and how do we write history? So when you read Ellis's A Social History of the Machine Gun, it's basically how to do material history. How the history of one thing, the machine gun, actually tells you the history of the evolution of the Western world and its relations with the non-Western world. Or when you look at Simon Sharma's Citizens, which is a fantastic book. It's a gigantic book, you can kill someone with it, but it's a fantastic book. And what Simon Sharma's Citizens does, is it shows us how to do parallel multiple histories. Because Simon Sharma is actually trying to show us that we can't talk about the French Revolution as the French Revolution, not as a singular revolution, but actually it's many revolutions taking place at the same time. It's a class revolution, it's a religious revolution, it's a gender revolution, all at the same time. That's a very interesting way of understanding history. And Todorov is my favorite. I became a historian because of Todorov. Todorov's Conquest of America is a very interesting book about how the European encounter with the American continent was basically an encounter between two language systems. That these are not simply, the Spanish meeting the native Mesoamericans, but rather it's an encounter between two language systems where these differences are untranslatable and where misunderstanding and miscomprehension are the conditions of possibility for language to work in the first place. So it's a writing of discursive history and the relationship between history and language. So, bila ada masa nanti, kita akan cuba memulakan siri ini dan hanya saya nak menjemput siapa yang minat. Kalau tak ada apa lagi nak buat hari Ahad, hari ini ada nasi kandar festival tau kat KL. You all datang kat sini buat apa? Ada nasi kandar festival di KL. Tapi kalau anda lebih minat kepada sejarah dan ingin mengambil bahagian dalam ni, mungkin nanti kita maklumkan tarikh dia bila kita dah sedia. Jadi this is an open invitation for those of you who are interested in looking at other ways of doing history, writing history and understanding history. Okay.
Okay, terima kasih kepada Ilmu. Harap semua orang boleh enjoy dengan lecture doktor dengan map and Jadi saya harap sahabat-sahabat tuan-tuan semua enjoy dengan program pada hari ini, dan untuk siri yang akan datang, saya juga menjemput sahabat-sahabat semua untuk siri yang ketiga pada bulan depan bersama dengan Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, Prof. Syed Farid, Dr. Munirah, Dr. Azhar sehingga hujung tahun, dan insyaAllah pada bulan depan untuk launching buku Dr. Ali Syariati yang diterjemahkan daripada bahasa Parsi ke bahasa Melayu. Itu yang baju merah Ustaz Syed itu merupakan penterjemah kepada karya itu daripada bahasa Parsi ke bahasa Melayu. Kod beristigma, kalau salah tu betul juga, betul tak? Okey. Kesedaran diri dan kepedayaan. Jadi saya harap boleh hadir pada buku itu dan juga buku proses usaha atas pluralism intellectual, dan pada tahun depan iaitu satu buku juga oleh almarhum Prof. Alatas iaitu Modernization and Social Change. Jadi boleh follow media sosial daripada Lesari Hikmah untuk datang dan mengikuti program-program yang akan diajukan. Terima kasih banyak. Satu tukar yang umroh untuk kita jumpa lagi. Terima kasih banyak.